want different results. Things you want to do differently means some things that you currently now do, you'll have to stop doing because you're probably busy, and some things that you'll want to start doing. So take notes about that, and I'll be happy to share the content with you. I'd like to start out with a quiz. Take out your phone, piece of paper, something, write down the fill in the blank. The purpose of a business is to create. So I'll give you a minute to write down the answer, and then I'll proceed to tell you why most people get this wrong. But I do want you to write it down so we can get a count of who got what answers. So
John, there isn't more than one correct answer to this?
not according to Peter Drucker. Okay, who wants to share their answer with me? Yes.
The purpose of the business is to create solutions for customers' most demanding problems.
Solutions to problems. Who had written down something similar to that?
I had a sequel.
We had
And to generate ROI.
and to generate ROI. Who had something similar to ROI? Who? Okay, we have a few. What else did you?
Yeah, I just, wealth.
Wealth. That's super. How
That's
about
the only
something
reason.
Similar to wealth. All right, that looks like most of you there. What else? What else didn't we cover here yet?
Period.
Pardon me?
The purpose of the business is to create.
Oh, to create. Oh, you don't want to create anything. You just want to create. Okay. Who create a creation? Okay. Yes.
Yeah, create something you want to wake up in the morning to do.
Create something to do when you want to wake up in the morning.
That you want to do.
That you want to do.
I said happiness and success.
Happiness and success. Did we cover pretty much everything? Yes.
Yeah, in line with the wealth, but I like to be more narrow, just to create profit.
To create profit.
Yeah, more narrow.
Okay. Profit leads to wealth, I assume. Okay. Yes.
How about just business, more business?
Who wants to create business? So it's a self-referential loop here. Merle.
To create value that someone's willing to pay for.
To create value that someone's willing to pay for, similar to the kind of first things we heard. The reason most people get this wrong, and I'll get to the answer in a minute, is because of the cruelest words that were ever written, at least in a business context, and that is this: build a better mousetrap, and what's the rest of the phrase? The world will be a path to your door, and that is not true. But it gives people the impression that business success is about a better mousetrap, that it's about the product. Gives you the idea that you should build first and sell after that. And that concept is a little bit backwards to the answer to the question, which Peter Drucker, how many do not know who Peter Drucker is? Peter Drucker put the study of management on the map in the 20th century. And he studied businesses from General Motors, back when Sloan was running it, to the Girl Scouts, did nonprofits, startups, big companies, small companies. He lived about 95 years old, so he had a long history of doing that. But he must have written about 80 books. If you could ever read anything by him, it hasn't gone out of date yet. And he says that the purpose of a business is to create a customer. And what I tell startups is, if you don't have a customer, you don't have a business. You may have a wonderful product, you may have a nice hobby, you may have a charity, you may have all kinds of wonderful things. You may have something wonderful to do in the morning that you want to get up and do, but it's not a business without a customer. So then the question comes up is, who is a customer? And a customer is somebody that pays you. Now, this used to be obvious until the apps and all these computerized things where people confused users with customers. A customer is somebody that pays you. And there's a saying about Facebook: if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And in fact, on Facebook, you are the product. They sell your attention to their advertisers who are their customers. So a customer is somebody that pays you. Why? Why do people pay you? Did anybody buy anything today? What'd you buy?
I bought cheese in a can that you squeeze out.
You bought cheese whiz
I did buy some other stuff too.
and some other stuff. Okay. Anybody else?
Car wash.
He bought a car wash. I bought lunch. I bought parking, and I bought a hot dog, which not for lunch. After. My belief is that when anybody buys anything, whether they're in a corporate using corporate money, whether it's your own money, at that moment you want that thing more than you want your money. You wanted that cheese whiz, or I wanted that parking space more than I wanted my money at that moment. I was once speaking on a topic similar to this, and I had this slide up, and I was speaking at Central State University to an entrepreneurial class, and that very day I had replaced my hot water heater. And there's something weird about my hot water heater that's power vented or something, so which means very expensive. It was $1,100. And I had to confront the fact that, yes, I wanted hot water after 3 days of no showers. I wanted hot water more than I wanted $1,100. But whenever you pay for something, there's an exchange of money for value. The trick is, the hard part is selling, not creating the value. And if you look at almost every industry and track where the money is spent, more money is generally spent in marketing and sales than in making the product. That's true in entertainment, that's true in food, that's true in hard stuff, that's true in software, it's true in services, insurance. If you track that, you'll find that most of the money goes to the marketing and sales end of things. The most highly paid people in most industries are salespeople. Selling is hard. And a guy named Steve Blank, I stole this topic from him. He had these in a straight line. There's market risk and there's technology risk in almost any endeavor. Technology risk means, will the damn thing work? Market risk means, will anybody buy it? And so if you're inventing the cure for cancer, all the risk is on making it work. There is no risk that people will buy it. People will definitely buy it if you can make it work. If you're making an app or a video game, there's no technology risk. I know that can be done. The question is, will people buy yours? That it's all market risk. If you're making pizza, it's neither. Anybody, you know pizza can be made, and you know people will buy it. But if you're struggling with both, if you don't know, will this thing work, or will anybody buy it, my suggestion is focus on the market risk first. Solve that first, because generally that's the harder one to solve. Eric Ries, how many know that name? He wrote a book, The Lean Startup. You may have heard of that. He tried the build it first approach, and he was a co-founder in a startup, and he was a coder, so they hunkered down in stealth mode, as many startups do, and he worked for 6 months and wrote 40,000 lines of code to build his product, and then they all got together and had a big launch party after 6 months and 40,000 lines of code, and they found out nobody cared. They had launched this thing and nobody cared. And that's when most companies fail. Maybe they'll do it again till they run out of money. Maybe they'll try to tweak the product. Maybe they'll try a different marketing approach. But this is why so many startups run out of money, because it's very expensive to do. What Eric did, and I don't know if this is the particular company that he started, because he tells the story in chopped up pieces, but he said, did I just waste 6 months of my life? Did I not provide any value to my company? Could I have spent those 6 months on the beach drinking pina coladas and provided the same value to my company? Because I spent 40,000 lines of code on this thing that nobody bought. And then he said, wait, I have created some value for the company. We learned something. We learned that nobody wants this thing I made. Not a big learning, but a very small piece of learning, but learned something. We learned one thing in the universe nobody wants to buy. And then he thought, did I have to spend 6 months and 40,000 lines of code learning that? Could I have learned it in 3 months and 20,000 lines of code? Could I have learned it in 1 month and no lines of code? And he ended up creating a process to do this learning cheaper, quicker, and with less risk. And it's in his book, The Lean Startup. He blogged all kinds of stuff about it. If you want to Google him or Lean Startup, there's all kinds of stuff on the web, stuff he wrote, lectures, videos of him talking, all about this concept of how do you learn this stuff ahead of time. What he's not very good at is naming things. Because he coined the phrase lean startup after lean manufacturing. How many are familiar with lean manufacturing? Lean manufacturing, the word lean means let's get rid of waste. People have misinterpreted this to mean a cheap startup. That's when you start for very little money, and that's not necessarily his point. His point is that you don't waste money. And the biggest waste in a startup is making something people don't want to buy. And he said, well, if we can eliminate that phase of it, find out what they want to buy, and then make it, we will have eliminated that waste. And so that means you don't necessarily build first. You find out what people want to buy, and you build what people want to buy. If you're wanting to commercialize your idea, because commercialize means commerce, which means you have to sell something to somebody. There's an interesting quote by a guy named Kawasaki who wrote a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I'm not really a big fan of most of the things he said, but he gives an incident where he's talking to someone who wants to be a writer. And she said she was studying literature. And her goal was to be a best-selling author. And he said, why are you studying literature instead of sales? Do you want to be a best writing author or a best-selling author? And I don't know if the light went on for her, but the light went on for him, that he wanted to be a best-selling author, so he figured out how to sell stuff, and he wrote what sold. So what Eric Ries discovered or put together was the learning cycle of a startup, where you start with your idea, you build a prototype, what he calls a minimum viable product, which again is a terrible name because it implies that it's actually a product. What he means by an MVP, or a minimum viable product, is the simplest thing that you can actually learn from. Sometimes it's a prototype. Sometimes it's a set of screenshots. Sometimes it is an actual product that people could buy. And then you test, and measure and get data, and then you learn from that, and then you generally are not right the first time. And so you recycle, you get better ideas, and you do it again, and you want to minimize your total time through this loop. Speaking of minimum viable products, how many of you use Dropbox or something similar to it? When they were launching, they did not tackle the technical. This was a very hard thing for them to do. There were other people trying to do this whole file synchronization bit at the same time. They had an idea of how it could be done, but rather than spend the time and money to actually do it, they put together a video of, wouldn't it be great if you could store your files on the cloud like this, and they'd be accessible to any device, and they showed people how simple it would be to work. This video went viral, and their beta test site, the sign-up list went from like 5,000 people to 75,000 like overnight. And that was actually their minimum viable product, if you will, to learn what people wanted to, that there was a market for this thing. Now, in their case, they are giving it away, so they had to learn how to monetize it, which was another step to it. But so this was Eric Ries's idea, that you go through this learning cycle as quickly as you can, spending as little money as you can. Steve Blank is a professor out in Silicon Valley. He also teaches a course in Columbia, and he was a mentor to Eric Ries, and he has put together with Eric some concepts about customer development, how to do this learning, and he has a quote that a startup is a temporary organization designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model, which is very different than the way most people think of a startup. And so if the purpose of a startup is to discover that business model, then progress is measured by learning, not by sales. When you have a repeatable, scalable business model, then you start ramping up, and then you start scaling up, so that then you start measuring the business by sales, but then it's out of the startup stage. So learning, if that's our goal, requires a falsifiable hypothesis, experiments, data, and a defined level of success or failure. Now we have a scientific approach to starting a company. You have to have a falsifiable hypothesis. You don't just say, I want to do something, I think people will buy this. Well, you have to put numbers to it, you have to have a way to test and experiment data, etc. One of the things that Eric Ries did in his successful company, they were making avatars, which are these little cartoon characters that represent yourself online. And they were selling them, and they wanted to keep adding features to these avatars that would sell, for $5 you can make it fly, for another $3 you can put wings on it. I don't know exactly how that's not my space, but that was his. And what he did was to test, to actually do his experiments, rather than build the whole thing of making it fly and building all the code around it, he just put a little button on the website that said, would you like to have your avatar fly? $4.99, click here. And if nobody clicked, guess what? He learned something. He didn't have to bother with all that code to find out nobody wanted it. He already knew nobody wanted it. And if people did click here, they got to a screen that said, oh, sorry, we're not quite ready yet. Give us your email and we'll let you know. And they could tell by the conversion ratios and all that kind of stuff whether it was worth building the code. And you'll see that now as you go on different places on the web. There is a company called LaunchRock that will put up a page like that for you, where you describe your product, you say click here to buy, and if people buy, they collect your emails. If they don't, then no harm, no foul. So that's a very common way of experimenting with web stuff. Now obviously with things that aren't web-based, the experiments are a little different. So what do you have to have hypotheses about when you're starting a business? And when I say hypothesis, it means, it really means a guess. But often we assume that it's a fact. And we say, well, everybody's going to want one of these because I do. And I've read so many stories about follow your passion and do what you want, and people will flood to it. And, that's kind of true for the people they write the stories about, but there's a little bit of survivor bias in that. That's not true for everybody. The story, how many of you seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Some of you look old enough to have seen that movie. It's about a guy who's out in the desert and he sees a UFO and he gets this noise in his head and he can't forget it. And one day he's at dinner and he starts making a mountain out of his mashed potatoes and he gets fixated on this mountain and he starts building dirt into the living room to build this mountain. And meanwhile, he's lost his job. His wife has taken the kids. He's just tearing his hair out. And he sees a picture on the TV of that mountain that he's building from this vision in his head. And he goes, oh my God, it's real. And he goes and he finds the place and he runs out there and he meets some other people who have seen the UFO and got the same thing in their head. And the alien, it's a landing pod for the aliens. and they come and pick him up in the spaceship. And it's a great movie. And I say, you know, there are people who are obsessed with UFOs. So obsessed that they lose their wife, their job, their kids, but they don't get picked up by the aliens, and they don't make movies about those people. So when you read about successful entrepreneurs who just followed their passion, or just, those are the only successful ones. You don't read about the ones that did the same thing and it didn't work. What works in business is finding a customer who wants to buy. So what do you need hypothesis about? Well, you need hypothesis about who was that masked man? In other words, who are your customers and what do they want to pay for? Who are they? Be as specific as you can. You probably have an idea in your head of who would buy this thing and why. Treat that not as a fact, but as a hypothesis, and then go out and test it. And so one way to test it is, if you can do what Eric Ries did, actually get traffic to a website that says, buy this, and see if people do. Another way to test it is to have conversations with people and say, you know, I think this might be a problem for people like you, but I'm not sure. Can you be honest with me? Tell me if my baby's ugly. Does that make sense? Another way to test it is just to go watch what people do in life in that particular realm. There was a story of General Electric building a new kind of battery, and they wanted to see if people who use batteries had problems. And so they just went around to places where there were batteries, and so one of the places they went to was a cold storage facility where the forklift trucks all ran on batteries. And this guy was just watching how those things worked, and he noticed that every couple of hours they all went over to this one corner of the warehouse. And he said to the guy running the place, he said, what's over there? Is that, donuts or something? And he said, no, the batteries run out in this cold environment. They run out very quickly. And so the guy said, oh, so if I can make a battery that lasts longer in the cold, now I've solved the problem. So that's another way to figure out what people want to pay for. Is just watch what they do in their life and see where those problems crop up. The other thing that is important is who decides what value is. And it's not us as inventors, it's the customer again. This is a picture of my back scratcher, which is a piece of garbage. I got splinters the first time I used it. These little rolling things at the bottom have fallen off. But it's perfect for me, because it only costs $1. And that's what I cared about. And I looked online, and there were fancy ones for $27, and there were all these other extendable things. And I couldn't, I had to go to the dollar store. It's so cheap, Walmart wouldn't even carry it. But that was my definition of value in this particular case. It's not the inventor's or the manufacturer's definition of value. And I was talking to a guy recently who used to work at a company that made machine parts for the aerospace industry. And he got a call, they got a call from their biggest customer one day who said, I'd like to come up and have a meeting with you guys. And they said, okay. The guy came in, set up in the conference room, and he said, you know that bearing I gave you to make the parts around? He said, can I see that bearing? And they gave him the bearing, and he said, do you have a plastic bag? And they gave him a plastic bag, and he put the bearing in the plastic bag, and he said, I'm taking it home, and you've lost all my business. And they said, why? We, our quality, our tolerances are way above spec. Our, everything is up to snuff. He said, yeah, but you're always 2 weeks late. And that's what I care about. I don't care of your definition of quality. Mine is it has to be there on time. And it took them 2 years to change their process to get on time and to win that business back. So it's the customer that decides. The guy named Alexander Osterwalder has done a lot of business modeling canvases, and he has a valuation canvas. And he says that customers buy for one of three reasons, or at least one of three reasons. One is they have pain. There's some pain that they want to get rid of. Another is there's something that they want to gain. And another is they have a job that they want done, and so they in effect hire a product or hire a service to do a job, which is a weird way of thinking about it, but when you can break out of that weird way of thinking about it, it's a very powerful way of thinking about it. So, for example, this mix of pains, gains, and jobs changes for different customers. Not necessarily for your product, but for different customers about your product. And then that changes how you make your product and how you sell to them. I hire a car, actually, that I bought in 2007. And I hire it to get me from point A to point B, relatively inexpensively. It's a Prius, so it's inexpensive. And I don't treat it very well. If you go out in the parking lot, assuming they haven't ticketed it, you'll see it's not in great shape. That's not what I hire a car for. Other people hire cars to be impressive. They want it to be snazzy, they want it to be shiny. Some hire cars to be fast. Others hire them to be, whatever. There are different reasons that people buy a car, and so the people who sell and make cars make different models for all those different reasons. And then, if you understand the pains, the gains, and the jobs that your customers have, then you can create, and I know this is too hard to read, but if you want this, this is a PDF that's at this website, which you can get when I give you this PowerPoint. You can map the pains, gains, and jobs to the things in your product that alleviate that pain or create that gain or provide the jobs that they want. And there's, in this fine print that you can't read on here, are a number of questions that you can ask when you talk to customers or prospective customers about this kind of thing. So that'll give you some ideas of how to figure out what is missing in people that they're willing to pay for. So again, you want to use that to minimize your total time through the learning loop. Again, back to this quote, the search for a repeatable and scalable business model. What does an actual business model look like? Well, you're searching for someone, that's who your customer is, who has a problem that they care enough to pay for, which is another piece. So it's not just enough to say, is this a problem? Somebody says, yeah, it's a problem. Well, it's 99 on my problems list, and I'm not about to do much about it. It's not that big a problem. You want to find a problem that's big enough that they care enough to pay for, and that you can solve. And that you can solve profitably. And that's all part of the search for the business model. And when you found it, when you can put numbers to these things. This is the lifetime value of a customer. This is the cost of acquiring that customer. This is the right number of customers for the capacity that you have. And then, and then that makes profit. So lifetime value of a customer, is how much they pay you times how often they pay you, minus what it costs you to provide the value to them over the lifetime that they stick with you. And the cost of acquisition is obviously the marketing and sales cost. And when you subtract what it costs to get that customer from their lifetime value, that should be a positive number. Otherwise, you're paying them to use your service, which can happen, actually. I'm working with a client right now that has it's up in the oil fields of Canada, and he has a car rental service and a car detailing service and a shuttle service from hotels to the airport. And when he started, he's been doing this for 9 months, and when he started breaking out his numbers, he found out his shuttle service is costing him money. And he didn't realize it because he'd never stopped to do the numbers and break out the whole thing by 3 different product categories. it was costing him more to provide the service than it was actually worth. And he didn't know it. So, if you can figure this out, and this works, now you've discovered the business model. And the business model is really about how that commerce is transacted, not necessarily about your product. Again, Xerox is famous for having invented the technology that makes dry copies. Before then, copies were wet. The chemicals wet the paper and it was not very pleasant. And so they invented this back in the 40s or 50s, but the machines were terribly expensive. And they couldn't figure out how to get people to buy them at what it cost them to make the machines. And they changed the business model to leasing the machines with a monthly fee that included 2,000 copies and a commitment to pay a number of cents for every copy additional to that. And people signed up like crazy because they loved the dry copies. And they looked at how many wet copies they made, and they said, 2,000? God, we'll never go through that. So they signed the lease. And, of course, when they made dry copies, it was much more convenient, much more pleasant. People started making them all over the place. And Xerox made a ton of money because of their business model, not just because of the technology. Because their cost of acquisition of customers with that program was very favorable, and the lifetime value of those customers who now started making 4, 5, 10,000 copies, that made this very profitable for them. The Japanese, a few decades later, redid the same technology in a different business model and ate Xerox's lunch. Because the Xerox machines at that time were big things, and they would sell one per building, and it was usually down in the basement. People were waiting on lines to make copies, and the Japanese figured out, oh, they could put these things in little boxes and sell one per floor. And it was similar technology, but a different business model. And Xerox missed that change. So again, the business model, once you've determined what that business model is, now you can scale it up. Now it becomes a money machine. The more you put into customer acquisition, then the more that comes out here. That's when you want to ramp it up. I look at this and I often say, where are the investors in this? I see the customers. I see the value that they're paying for. I see this N means the right number of customers based on your capacity to sell and your capacity to serve. So if you're, keep doing that, sorry about that. If your service involves machinery, for example, you don't want a big machine running at low capacity, just sitting there not making any money for you. You want to have the right capacity there. And there are no investors, actually, in this formula. Because what investors do is they time shift this. You often have to spend money acquiring customers or spend money building some value before you can actually sell it. Although not always. Sometimes when you do the right customer development and you go out there and you say to people, how, will this work for you? What's your problem? I think I can solve it. Sometimes they'll pay you right then. They'll say, look, I want to be first on your list. I'd like a discount. Can I give you money so that you can build it, and etc. So sometimes you can actually sell some before you actually build it. But many times you can't. And so what investors do, or lenders, or wherever you get your money, they will time shift this. They give you the money ahead of time. But the problem with investors is they want their money back. And they want more money back than they gave you. And so if the business model doesn't make sense to generate the kinds of returns that investors need, you're not going to get investors in your company. And this, again, is a misconception in the press Because you read about people, oh, this company just started up and they don't have a product, but they got $10 million worth of funding. And this company got this much funding, and this company's valued at $1 billion, and only have 13 people working there. And again, that's survivor bias. That's why it makes a good story. And so it gives the impression that step one, get an idea, step two, get funding. And it doesn't work that way. If you want to get funded, you need to show evidence that I know how much it costs to acquire a customer. And I have data to prove that. And I know what the cost of serving that customer is and what the lifetime value of that customer is, because I have data to show that's what they're willing to pay, and here's my cost of goods, etc. And I can ramp up to the right number to have profit. And with most, some of you I know were looking for angels. With most angel investment, which is a form of equity, angel money and VC money is similar, except that angels invest their own money, VCs invest somebody else's money. But they invest in stock in your company. They will buy equity in your company, and they want you to use that money to scale up this model so that there's profit, but they don't make any money until the company gets acquired. Until somebody buys the company, or the company has an IPO, which means the public stock market buys it. And so it's a very risky form of investment, and it means that if your business can't grow big, fast, and get sold, it's not the right business model for that kind of investment. Even though that's what you mostly hear about, that's not how most companies get funded. In fact, in the last 50 years, half of the companies that have gone IPO in the stock market were not funded by angel money or VC money. And if you know the numbers, there's about 500,000 companies a year started in the U.S. Let's say half of those are solopreneurs and freelancers and things like that. So there's 250,000 companies started. VCs only fund about 3,000 a year. Angels maybe about 50 or 60,000 a year. That's a whole lot of companies that get started without that kind of investment. And the good reason for it is because they shouldn't get that kind of investment. They won't have the kinds of returns that investors want. The best money comes from customers. So you say, but I need money. I'm out of money. I need to pay a lawyer to get my IP done. I need to get a prototype. Well, that's nice that you need money, but that doesn't make you a good investment. It's like the guy standing by the highway will work for food. He's very hungry, and he really needs a haircut, and he probably needs a shower, and all the things that he needs have nothing to do with whether he'd be a good employee. And it probably has an inverse relationship in that case. Just like when you want to sell something, you don't go to a customer and say, buy my widget because I need faster internet. You say, buy my widget because it's going to do something wonderful for you. And likewise, when you go to an investor, you want to show that it's going to do something wonderful for them. And by the way, investors want you to get rich because they'll get rich alongside you. But they want you to get rich when they get rich, when the company gets sold. So, absent that, what are some other resources you have? I just want to say that funding is not the answer if the business model is not sound. And real money comes from customers. If you don't have customers, or if you don't have data to show how you can get customers and what it costs to get customers and what they're willing to pay, then you need to be working on your business model. So again, you can't read this fine print. There's some websites, but you'll get them in the PowerPoint. So sometimes you can get funding from vendors. If you can show that this product will be bought by customers and you're going to buy supplies and other things from your vendors, some vendors will say, I'll front you some money. I want you to be my customer. I will invest with you or for you. Sometimes customers will fund it. If you can show a company that if you could develop this thing, it'll be good for them as a customer, sometimes they'll front you the money. You can sell your rights and let somebody else do the marketing and do the sales and build the company. It's a very different skill than inventing. You have a question?
Yeah, what does DECD stand for?
I'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
I'm working through the list.
Jumping ahead.
You can license, and a couple people here were licensing people. Licensing means I own the rights, I don't sell you the rights, but you go out and build the product, sell the product, and just give me a cut of everything. A joint venture would be a similar relationship, but not necessarily on the same terms, but where my job is to do the invention part, your job might be to do the sales and marketing part. SBIR is a fund that I think there are 8 government agencies. Department of Defense is one of the big ones. National Institutes of Health is another one, and there's several others. And they allocate money for commercialization of specific products. And the way that works is they say, we're the Navy and we need an XYZ that'll do some such and such. And if you have something like that, you can get a grant through the SBIR program. And the phase 1, I believe, is $100,000 or $150,000. Phase 2 can be $1 million to commercialize your product and sell it to them, and then you can sell it to anybody else. It's a grant. It's not a loan. It's not equity, so it's non-dilutive, as they call it. So if that works, it's good money. Connecticut actually has a very good office to help you get these grants, and that's on this first line here is the website for that. That's through Connecticut Innovations. And their SBIR office also has some other programs and sources of funds, so I encourage you to look there. Sikorsky Challenge, the Sikorsky company puts a challenge out every year. They've done it for 3 years now, where they put out 4 or 5 concepts or products or projects that they want that will help them in some way with their helicopter business. But it's very cutting edge. It's very far out there. And if you have a product and you want to apply for this challenge, you can do that. I don't think they give you money, but they give you space in their incubator in Stanford, and they give you some mentoring. And obviously, they're likely to be a customer or possibly even acquire your company if it works. There are some other companies, big companies in Connecticut that do this. Pitney Bowes did one. I don't know if they're continuing it. Crowdfunding is a concept where, at the moment, people will pay you money to build your product. At the moment, they don't buy equity. They just basically buy your product. It's a great way to test the market. And this is Kickstarter and Indiegogo. There's a number of sites that do this. You can launch your product. You say, I want to prototype this. You have to have, on Kickstarter anyway, you have to actually have a physical prototype of the thing. There's some rules about it. There's a company in New Haven called Raygun 5, Roman numeral 5, the V, Raygun V, that is 3 people that will help you launch a Kickstarter or a similar campaign. And then if it makes more, the way those things work is you set a goal and people contribute, and if the goal is not reached, everybody gets their money back. If the goal is reached or more, then you get the money minus the fee. And what this company does is they help you to go through these Kickstarter events, and if you get more than the goal, then they get a percentage of that. So it doesn't cost you anything up front. It's Raygun V. And they have a lot of ideas and insight about how to price it, how to, you give different prizes for different levels of payment, and they have some ideas about how to do that, and then they promote it through social media and other ways. It's not just something you can put up there and hope people will show up anymore. It's gotten too popular for that, but it is a way not only of funding your project, but it also can tell you whether there's a market for it, if people want to buy it. Because usually what people get from paying you is they get one of your products often at a discount. So you can kind of judge the market from that. DECD is a department in Connecticut, Department of Economic and Community Development. And they have a Small Business Express program which gives loans and grants to small companies. Their websites are here. And then the Angel Investor Forum for companies who are appropriate for angel investment. And this is our page where we tell you a little bit about the kinds of things we're looking for in companies. So these are some other options that you have if you don't want to do it yourself and actually start up a business. So that's what I have for tonight. This is me, how to reach me if you have any questions, comments, etc. If you give me your card or scribble your email address on a piece of paper tonight, I will send you a copy of this PowerPoint. And how much time do we have, Doug, for questions?
As much as you like.
As much as I like, okay. Questions, comments? Yeah.
I'll just say that actually the $30,000 that I mentioned earlier was through a Connecticut Innovations Program.
Okay.
So it's a matching fund. You find a way to make jobs. If you have a product that will make at least one job here in the state, they're willing to give that company $25,000 matching grants plus another $5,000